attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, this is Fred Iantorno, Executive Director of CIECA. Welcome to the CIECAcast. Today's presentation will include a summary of the changes and additions to the BMS in Release 2014 R2. Today, Dan Webster will present those changes and additions. Dan is a senior architect at Mitchell International, specializing in trading partner integrations. Dan has worked on auto-physical damage integrations for over 20 years and enjoyed an insider's view of the collision industry's transition from proprietary communication protocols and data formats to today's more standardized environment. I want to thank all of you for spending your time with us and to our presenter for sharing his insight and expertise with us. I will now turn this over to Dan Webster, our presenter. Thank you, Dan. Dan? Hello, Dan. Dan. Are you there, Dan?
I cannot hear him either.
Dan, we cannot hear you. Audience, please hold while we try to connect with Dan. So I think something's happened with him, with his audio. We're going to have Dan call back in. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out what's wrong. Dan, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
So glad to hear it.
Charlie, can you hear him?
For any mix-up.
Charlie, can you hear him?
I can hear Dan as well.
Okay. I suppose everybody else can. Sorry again for the technical difficulty. Again, Dan Webster.
Hello, all. As I said, it's my great privilege to present the progress that the CIECA Architecture Committee has done on the BMS for this release. And I was also noting that with just a small number of changes at our October meeting, that I'll have more time on this webinar to go into depth about whatnot. I didn't know I'd start wasting the time by losing the call and calling back in, but that's the way it goes. What we have is for those of you who are new to the BMS and are learning about it on this webinar, we're talking about a release that we do twice a year. That's why it's designated by the year and the release number 1 or 2. And our specification consists of 3 parts: the BMS Word document, Code List, really one of the most important things CIECA does for standardization purposes, and the schemas describing how to implement the BMS in extensible markup language. We will talk today about the BMS changes by functional area, the code table changes by functional area, some exciting new changes regarding what your architecture committee does on QA sessions and releases, and the future excitement about JSON and new data technology. So as a reminder, the BMS got a name change. Some people have referred to it for many years as standing for Business Message Specification, and we now, for the last couple of years, have referred to BMS as the Business Message Suite. The BMS, when we're talking about the Word document, is organized into sections, 18 of them, I believe. And the section 1 is a welcome and overview, which we have, over the last year or so, been changing and improving. We actually read it and compared it to the material we work with every day, and I think we've improved on that. Section 2 is the rules and definitions. Section 3 we spend a lot of our work on, which is the common elements and aggregates that are shared between different messages, different committees, and then the messages themselves are organized into sections 4 through 18. And these sections specifically start with 4, the assignment service, which is where we all started doing assignments for collision estimates, and we've moved on significantly from there. The next chapter is estimate services. Section 6 is disposition services. 7, the attachment services, which is very important for exchanging documents and files of different types. A lot of activity lately on Section 8, the parts and material and repair order services. Section 9 will be for vehicle repair status. 10 for authorization. 11 for invoice statement and remittance service, another level of a lot of activity. Section 12 for location service. 13 for surveys. 14 for valuations. 15 for title service. 16 for claim service. 17 for status service, and 18 is our most recent new service dealing with appointments. The messages themselves have a, in each of these sections, have a organization for the functionality, what the purpose of the message is, why we added it when we first added it. It has a, to use the assignment one as an example, you start out with the aggregates that are common only to the messages being described in that chapter. And again, using assignments as an example, we have sections 2, 4, and 6 for the request messages, 4, 5, 7 for the response messages. And then when we talk about common aggregates, we find over the years we want to reuse something that's been added for a particular message in another message, and at that point it gets promoted up to the ever-growing section 3 of what's common for the CIECA messages. Again, a big part of our standards activity. Then the code lists are in a we call it a spreadsheet, but it's actually a Microsoft Excel workbook with some 179 tabs, 177 of which are the actual code tables. And this is the idea that when we have a message and certain types of codes for vehicle types, for example, insurance coverage types, part types, we come to an agreement as a standards body as to what those codes should be, and we put them in a code list, which we then maintain. And in this last release, we've updated even since we did the slide here. There's 177 code tables with 2 additions in Bloomington this year. The schemas then are the actual XML schema definition language that describes what a XML message looks like for what the document looks like for a CIECA message. And we now have 2 matched sets of the schemas, one which continues the practice that we did until 2011, where the code lists were the responsibility of the trading partners to comply with the codes that you would find in there. And we now have a code extension or strictified version of the schema, which reads the codes out of the Excel workbook, puts them in restricted enumerations for the data element types, and then when you do XML schema validation, if you haven't used the specified codes, you get a validation error. So that work was started in 2011 and is now at a very advanced state of maintenance by our QA committee and all of the architecture and standards committees. We'll move on to the changes the small number of changes that were made for this release, and the committees that asked for them were the Vehicle Damage and Imaging Committee, Claim Save, Recycled Parts and Inventory, Salvage, and Subrogation. And we'll get into the specifics of which each one was asking for. In Section 3, a fairly significant change was made that will benefit us in future releases, and that was to add a custom element, an advanced concept of a name-value pair, where it's going to have an element ID and the choice of a payload of the types you see here, the text, currency, decimal, date, time, or indicator. Within vehicle info, which has long been promoted to the Section 3 on common aggregates, we added the new custom element structure to vehicle info, so new things that might come up or be specific to a certain integration can be added within a vehicle. Claim info, similarly, is where an instance of custom element was added. We added custom element again in policy info, as well as a new policy type name element. And then in part info, we added part material code. That part material code, keep that in mind because you see it was a big part of our changes. It was added also in non-OEM, in alternative part info, in selected part, and in quoted part. And I don't think we're in a position to actually show the code list in the webinar today, but what we're talking about by material type was things like aluminum, boron, high-strength steel, and we debated long and hard about whether we already have an element called part type, and this is a part type, but the one part type we already have is for the channel through which you obtain the part, new, LKQ, recycled, etc. And this is the actual material type. And look at that, we've added it in fulfilled part, in invoice item as well. Moving on to Section 6, within bid info, we added a bid expiration date time. The recent experience of using this message pointed out the need for this missing element. In Section 11, in the remittance info header, We added a total amount received and a remittance error code. We added a remittance error status request and response pair of messages. Onto the code list, we had changes to the application type code by the Recycled Parts and Inventory Committee, to the bid type by Salvage, to the country code by Salvage. This is one of the most interesting ones for my money. We learned that salvage cars could come in or go to any country on the globe, so we added every ISO code for two-letter code for countries here and had a great time with our new testing process to make sure we had examples of all those countries. And it also led us to accommodate the character set that our U.S.-based members weren't that accustomed to using or seeing. The document type, we added a couple for salvage, as you saw a couple slides ago. Document subtype, we added a couple for the VDI committee. Inventory status was added a couple codes. Invoice rejection error code and invoice type code. The second page of this talks about paid status codes, part type codes, party type codes for subrogation, payer type codes for subrogation. Very busy committee this. Payment type codes for subrogation, salvage provider change code for salvage, salver status update code for salvage, and some total type changes for subrogation. And for salvage, the vehicle type, we added some codes there and a vendor code for recycled parts and inventory. We welcome some new vendors. To get us up to a new total of 177 code lists, we added 2 completely new ones, as I referred to before, the part material code list and the remittance error code list. The quality assurance sessions, I have been heavily involved in traveling to these twice a year for the last few years, and we've really got a little more organization going this time, and had an excellent meeting in Bloomington, Illinois last month, and we would welcome any of you who want to participate in these to help us out, because volunteer participation is really what makes this standard go. But what we always have been doing for several years now in the QA sessions is auditing the changes of the BMS, the code lists, and the schema. And what we're talking about there is that throughout the 6-month period, now for the 2015 R1 release, committees will be requesting changes, new messages, new codes. Sometimes even a new committee is chartered, and they come up with requests that need to get into all the forms of the specification we've talked about. The structure of the message has to be described in the BMS Word document. We need current matter describing why we use the message, what it's for. The code list enumerations are hashed out and put in the Word document. And all of this is put in a XML schema form that we can use to validate documents. We have always discussed architectural issues such as code lists and guidelines, very helpful in describing to new committees how long their codes should be, what kind of characters they should have in them, to try to establish some consistency, which really is a little more difficult when you have such a heterogeneous group contributing messages and having needs out of CIECA. So we have code list guidelines, schema guidelines, and newly activity about making a schema for the JavaScript object notation, the JSON schema developments, etc. What is new about QA sessions for the first time this time is we were requesting of committees that want a new message or a change to a message that in addition to the requests in the form of edits to the Word document and to the Excel workbook, they needed to submit a example XML document that the way I like to describe it using the new test-driven development terminology is you want to have a test that will fail until your changes have been added to the schema. And there was some debate about this, but I think we decided that it's not too much to ask if a committee or a requestor is expecting to start trading partner integrations with a new message, that they could have a sample of it before we go into the officially put it into a release. So that happened at our QA session in Bloomington. It happened on the last day, and it was went better than any of us could have expected, such that we're expecting to apply the same idea to existing messages and backfill examples of everything to ensure we have backward compatibility, which previously was more of a concept for debating about than something to test. Beyond XML, we have for many years had front matter in our business message specification or business message suite that claimed that the specification material and the documents about it were technology agnostic. So we didn't know what the technology was, and the schema was a whole separate part of things. But over a 15-year period of going from the Word document and spreadsheet into XML schema, we got into the habit of writing things that weren't really as unknowing of the technology as we claimed to be. But we got a wake-up call within the last couple of years that members are requesting a JavaScript object notation version of the CIECA BMS, and we have a active committee that we met with just last week in Colorado that's making a schema in JSON, and now we've got to actually go through the standard again and make sure it's not entirely about XML and refers to just the concepts that the different technologies are going to implement. The JSON standards are being developed, and this is an exciting time, similar to what we were doing with XML in the late 1990s. We've got a committee with new people on it, and it's led by our Volunteer of the Year, Todd Hickerson, that started an open source program on the GitHub platform, and is building element by element from our section 3 of common aggregates and elements, the building blocks we will need to do messages in JSON, and far beyond what we've done with XML over the years, we're coming up with a test, one element at a time, to make sure everything that gets checked into GitHub has a test showing that it works. We joked last week at this meeting in Colorado Springs that over the course of the 2-day session, we developed more tests for the JSON implementation that's only partially complete than we've built up in our 15-some years of doing a XML standard. But we're getting smarter all the time. So we had our first face-to-face meeting, and we're manually converting section 3, not only the fragments of the schema, but tests for them. And this is going to continue. I expressed some hope that the next meeting or the next webinar like this in April, we'd be announcing having a JSON version of the schema as part of the package, and I'm not sure that's the consensus of the members of the JSON and architecture committees, but that's the goal. And then after we get the common elements and attributes defined, we're going to move on and do the messages, again, the equivalent of our sections 4 through 18 here. Within each committee, CIECA members are going to be documenting their standards. They have charters and business plans, implementation guides, and appendices to the implementation guide. And this is certainly the process for chartering a new committee. You have a reason that you've got to have a committee, and business plans describing what it's all about. Implementation guides describe how you will use the new messages that CIECA is adding for you, and Appendix C actually provides Appendix C, excuse me, actually provides example XML that is one of the inputs into our test documents that we're going to be using in future QA sessions. For the upcoming release for the spring of next year, subrogation, invoice, and remittance message is working on a responsible party to the subrogation vendor to demanding party to subrogation vendor. So these are more trading partner relationships that are going to be implemented with their new messages. And the parts and material procurement and recycled parts and inventory are working on an inventory message. So thank you for joining us today. Again, it's been my pleasure to present to you, and it's certainly my pleasure to work on weekly conference calls with other members of CIECA and participants, and particularly my pleasure to go to these meetings where we get the substantial work of maintaining these different parts of the BMS together. And I invite you who are on the call today to contact Charlie. His Charlie Quirt at charlie@CIECA.com. If you want to participate in these meetings, I think you will find it quite rewarding. So again, thank you for your time, and let's do this again in about 6 months.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, the audience, for participating. This concludes CIECA's 2014 CIECAcast series. The Education Committee is finalizing its plans for the 2015 series. You'll receive notice about that new schedule before the year end. I want to wish all of you and your families a very happy Thanksgiving. If you're traveling, please travel safely. Thank you and have a great day. This concludes the seminar.